Did it fuck up my new thing I did? No. Okay. All right. Oh, man. Oh, man. It's too hot to wear a hat. Otherwise, I would. uh, my computer says it's 80. And it is what it is. Isn't Seattle the suicide capital of the world? Yeah. I remember being out in Spokane to go visit a friend of mine before he deployed. That was a lot of fun. I really like Spokane area. Although it's kind of a hipster town. I mean, it is what it is. But it's a pretty nice area. Well, they probably need the revenue. It's like, so I'm about 45 minutes east of Chicago, and it's like, yeah, we still get Chicago people to come invade our private ponds area, lakes and whatnot. It's like, you assholes, this is our lake. Yeah, it's my car battery to throw in the water, not yours. The legal crack. I thought that was a perk rather than a disappointment. Eh. Okay, let's just gonna jump right into this. Let's see. All right, here we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Fluffy Hobo show. Sorry for cutting the channel early. I can't use technology properly. Today, I have with me the Cameron Cohen, who hosts the Cameron Cohen or Cameron Journal podcast, right? Did I get that right?
Yes. Yes. My name is Cameron Cowen. I host the Cameron Journal podcast, and I also write at CameronJournal.com.
All right. I saw your recent piece actually with China and the U.S. and the Pacific. And
Yes.
let's start with that one. What do you think about that? Do you think Pelosi's actually going to land in Taiwan to start a new war?
No. One of the things that I was focusing on with that was the fact that one, Pelosi's not going because it's going to inflame tensions with mainland China, and the Biden administration with the Ukraine kerfluffle going is just not going to do that. You know, the last thing you need while having a war in Ukraine is another war in Asia.
So
So
some skeptics have actually stated that Pelosi is 87, I think. I think that's how old
yes,
she is.
yeah.
And if she was to go to Taiwan and get shot down, she'd actually die a martyr, putting her in history. And that's probably something she would want to do anyways. Because otherwise, she's just going to be remembered as a scummy politician.
I mean, that's a nice idea. It's important to also remember, one, most people are not necessarily going to willingly march to their own death. Two, Nancy Pelosi is also a devout Catholic.
Is she though? Because she's advocating for a lot of abortion rights and a lot of like not so many, what's the word? Self-reliance tricks.
Yes, I mean, yeah, and the Archbishop of San Francisco denied her communion. So in a power move, she flew all the way to Rome and had communion directly from the Pope. So, and I'm not saying that her policies or her politics aligns entirely with the Catholic Church, because Lord knows it does not. My point, though, is that I believe her Catholic faith is closely held. And I'm not one to judge somebody else's religiosity or not, but I think her Catholic faith would preclude her basically going on a known suicide mission.
I'm,
I don't think that's gonna be a thing. I do think we are facing down China over Taiwan here soon enough. Xi Jinping said by the end, it's one of his major parts of the 5-year plan, a new one of which will come out in China this fall at their quintennial congress, their 5-year party congress, that he wants to bring all parts of China back under one roof. Hong Kong was the start back in 97. Taiwan is next. So I would not be at all surprised if China wants to make a move on Taiwan, and especially given China's domestic situation. Nothing starts a war faster than stodgy domestic politics. So
that and China's
yeah.
banks are actually just furling and imploding on themselves. Like China's about to default on a
yes.
lot of their debt.
I have been talking about China's debt problem for 10 years, and nobody believed me. My dad, literally, we were talking about global economics last year, and he said, I think you greatly underestimate China. And I said, I think you overestimate them. You're expecting a country who's so heavily in debt, it makes us look like we're good citizens, and you're depending on that nation to have major sway over things, when in the reality is they are, a couple years of bad growth away from defaulting on everything and losing it all. And that is what's slowly starting to happen. Their debt bubble is starting to collapse. And we don't know how big it is, because no number coming out of China is honest.
Right.
Ever.
And I also think what expedited that and kind of speeded things up was the coronavirus. Granted, we can go back and forth on whether or not it was staged or not, but that's something I don't really have any dog in the fight for. What happened is it happened, and we got to deal with the consequences. So I think that the whole virus thing kind of kicked a leg out underneath China, and they have to appear strong so that way they don't get overran themselves. That's what I think.
Oh, certainly. But they're also shooting themselves in the foot with this disastrous zero COVID policy.
Oh, yeah, where they were welding people inside their buildings.
Yeah, like China, take a hint from the rest of the world. If sophisticated, developed Western countries cannot keep control of this virus, and we still have to deal with infection at some much more modest level than we used to, and have to learn to live with it, guess what? So do you, and you have 1/6 of the world's population.
Yeah.
So,
and they're also one of the world's biggest polluters. So, I mean, that's a thing too.
Right. So it's something where, not only did the pandemic speed up China's problem, and certainly with their real estate market, but they also have governmental policies that are not helping their cause. So to some degree, they got shot in the back, and now they're shooting themselves in the foot.
Somebody flashbanged China and they just started spraying.
Exactly. To be kind of like, there's bullets flying everywhere. No one knows what's going on. I mean, yeah, it's a whole, that's a huge problem. But yeah, China's probably going to try to make a move on Taiwan because Xi Jinping needs a win right now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then yes, and you have the 5-year Congress coming up and the new 5-year plan. So I think that's something going to happen, which is why I think Pelosi will be staying at home, because the last thing the Biden administration wants to do is inflame tensions more than they already are.
Well, because, Hunter's dealings with China, he doesn't want to step on bad policy with a good friend, right?
I don't think that necessarily has anything to do with it as such. I think it's a simple matter of this war in Ukraine is not going to end anytime soon, unless Europe and the United States forces Zelensky to take a deal from Putin. And when you already have a proxy war going with Russia that could inflame into a hot war at any moment.
I mean, is it already a hot war? People are dying and getting shot at.
Certainly, but fortunately for us, it's Ukrainians who are doing the shooting and dying, and not American troops. This is
That's
the
not
type of
true.
this is a situation where, if one Russian missile crosses the wrong border and blows up a cottage in the wrong country, all of a sudden it's NATO versus Russia, and a whole bunch of Cold War scenarios suddenly become incredibly salient.
I think it would
Um,
be what's the group? It's Brazil, China, Russia, and another country. Is it Burns? Burn something.
you mean the BRICS? That
BRICS,
includes
BRICS.
India.
Yes, BRICS. So because of NATO, BRICS was established as a counter to NATO. I think it's going to be NATO versus BRICS at that point because they signed a pact to do that with the BRICS. So if Russia did accidentally or mistakenly fired a missile into the wrong spot, it would be NATO versus BRICS, and then that would kick off World War III. But that's kind of a subjective point because so we're going to switch gears to Russia
No, but I
then.
mean, therein lies the problem, and that is why nobody is in the mood to cause any more problems with China than absolutely necessary. We already have a World War III potentiality, out there. I mean, in the course of this year, we've gone through, the realest threat we've had of nuclear war since 1991.
Right.
I personally bought iodine and put it in my medicine cabinet. All this type of thing. Because I live in a first strike city and I'm on the West Coast. As I tell my friends on the East Coast, I said, at least you get all 35 minutes of Russia's missile flight time. I live on the West Coast, it's 11.
Yeah.
They get here much faster. We're way closer. We have 11 minutes.
Right.
Like, that's all that we have.
Right.
So the minute the military goes on alert, I'm leaving town. And so because we only have 11 minutes. I mean, and that's just been this calendar year. We've gone through that whole emotional roller coaster of all of that. The last thing we need to do right now is cause another international kerfluffle. And we've already seen what the war in Ukraine has done to the economy. Can you imagine issues with China as well?
I don't. Okay, maybe you got more information than me, but I don't understand how a conflict in Ukraine can cause so many issues here in America. Go ahead and try and convince me with this one because I don't see how it's possible.
Oh, it's simple because of globalization. When you have supply lines stretched all over the world, and those supply lines and that globalization depends on a stable global world order. You have all sorts of problems. Ships have to be rerouted, all this sort of thing. Also, the other thing that is there's a lot of raw materials that come out of both Russia and Ukraine. When Russia is sanctioned, all that material, when Ukraine's bombed and the farmers don't plant wheat prices go up. And
Right.
Ukraine supplies 1/6 of the world's wheat. When you do not have raw materials coming out of Russia to the West, the cost for those things as they must be purchased elsewhere goes up. And that just builds every time those raw material commodity input costs go up. The cost of everything that is made from those materials also goes up. The cost of food on global markets goes up because now global markets, it's all connected. A problem anywhere in the global market is going to cause issues elsewhere in the global market. So, the lack of wheat production in Ukraine is going to cause a rise in commodity prices in the United States. Factory shutdowns in China is going to cause supply chain issues for Europe primarily, but also the United States. The global economy is all interconnected. So you can't necessarily think of economics in terms of nations and countries. You have to think of it really as a global system, a system in which if there's a problem anywhere within the system, there are knock-on effects throughout the rest of the world. And so
Right.
that's why a war in Ukraine and the lack of wheat production and sanctions on Russia cutting off commodities causes a whole host of downstream effects in terms of raw goods and the manufacturings of goods and creation of services.
Okay, but let me throw this at you here. So there was a Norwegian country that told farmers to stop farming because of the global warming nitrogen supply that they use for the fertilizer. And the farmers started
Right.
to protest that.
Yeah.
The police shot at the farmers for protesting. And then
Yeah.
at the same time, their leader claimed that there's going to be a global famine. So at some point, it's left hand doesn't know what right hand is doing.
Absolutely.
Especially because there was a
that's an example. I mean, that's an example of a very bad local national decision that's not in line with the global situation.
well, we got another one here because I just recently found this one. It was there's a chicken farmer in Wisconsin had about 3,000 chickens. The federal government, our government, came through and paid him $4.5 million to close the doors on the chicken cage and let him die.
Right.
And he said no. Then the government said, okay, if you don't take the money, then we're going to come in with health code violations and shut you down and fine you. So he had to take the money. On top of that, we've got how many food plants and processing centers that have been set fire just this year alone, which is actually 30% higher than usual. Which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but we're already at 56 fires for food centers this year alone, and the year's not done yet. So I think it's more of the world order is actually forcing this famine to happen because people are tired of the world order as it is. So this is their way of kind of controlling sorry, I'm stuttering my words here. It's too bad. Opposition. That's the word.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, so there's a couple of things at play there. So those arsons at food processing plants, the old fashioned, oopsie, set the place on fire, collect the insurance money. Especially if the building is 20 years old and you can't take depreciation deduction on it anymore. You certainly it may behoove you to just kind of set the place on fire, collect the insurance money, and build a new facility next door. That trick is a tale as old as time.
See, actually, there was only 10 facilities that were proven to be arson like that. There was actually one that got set on fire because a plane crashed on it. It was a small engine plane crashed into it. And then there was another one that Black Lives Matter came through and Molotov the building. Because there was vegans in the mix that said, no, this place is against white people or against black people for some reason. And like, you guys are so racist, you don't even see the fact that you're making a racist statement. What is this? Like, you're saying a food processing plant center, which was designed for Tyson's chicken nuggets, is racist against black people because it's chicken. Are you serious right now? Like, really?
Yeah, that's it. Honestly, that's the moment when I'm kind of like, damn, if we could get activists to be so important on things that actually matter rather than performative BS, we could really do something in this country.
Yeah, exactly.
What an idea. That's a situation where when it comes to the farmer and his chickens and being paid to kill them all without sending them to market, that's something the government has done since the Great Depression to keep commodity prices high. Agriculture is one of the funny things in this country is agriculture is always held up as this sort of American dream, like people tilling the land and working hard to make their own future, and we don't need the government and all this type of thing. Farming in this country is one of the most government manipulated, government subsidized industries anywhere. The government and has done so since the 1930s. The government manipulates commodity prices in just the way you described, so farmers always make money. Anytime there is a problem with commodity prices, the government writes checks to the tunes of billions of dollars. Trump did this when he raised tariffs on soybeans coming in from China. American farmers lost money on that deal. They sent out $12 billion to soybean farmers. So this is something where, since the Great Depression, the government manipulation of commodity prices and all this type of thing for the sake of farming is just something that goes on. And sometimes it causes the government and farmers to do very nonsensical things that make no sense to the average person, but it's really all in the service of keeping up commodity prices. That's the whole game, is to make sure that the price of whatever, corn, barley, wheat, pig bellies, chickens, you name it, stays high enough that farmers don't lose money. Imagine if we did that in any other sector or industry in this country.
So I got an article here from Reuters. Trump payments to farmers hit all-time high ahead of election. Although it's framed in a way to make it sound like Trump is paying off farmers. But if you scroll down to the end here, it states that this is not an aid, but instead a stimulus for farmers because of COVID-19, and was actually worked in and voted on by many of the Democrats. And it was 14 billion package aid farmer for Wisconsin alone. And
Of course. Yeah. No, that's standard operating procedure.
But this was something that Trump didn't do. This was something that the Democratic Congress did.
No, if you want to see about the soybean thing, you would need to look up Trump soybean tariffs and farmers. When Trump, because he had his whole thing about this trade war with China, and China in response raised tariffs on American soybeans, and there was a payment sent out of about $12 billion. In fact, a very popular YouTuber, the Minnesota Millennial Farmer, actually talked about getting paid by the government for his soybeans in the middle of all that. And I think this was probably 2017, 2018, possibly.
I don't want to make
when this occurred. And that was, but this regardless of what it is, this is standard operating procedure in terms of billions of government subsidies sent out to farmers to prop up agriculture. I mean, it is endemic in the system.
So from the Hill, I've gotten U.S. soybean sales to China are down 94% amid Trump tariff reports. This is 2018 article, so this is pre-pandemic. And,
that's about the time you're looking for.
87% of
11.
See
if I can find it.
Okay. Let's see. Can I Control C? I'll go into the Zoom chat here. Control V. That's the article I'm looking at. So that way you can see the same page I'm on.
Well, here we are, modernfarmer.com, August of 2018. Soybean farmers get big chunk of $12 billion bailout money.
Can you send me that link real quick?
I can. Here it is.
Just so, me and my viewers are on the same page of what you're saying. Let's see. Soybean farmers get a big chunk of, 12 billion bailout. All right.
Yes, the first paragraph is salient. Donald Trump's tariffs on products from major trade partners like China and the EU sparked retaliatory tariffs from those partners, particularly on agricultural goods. In response, Trump's USDA announced a $12 billion package, and we're just now seeing where that money might go. And then they go on to explain who's getting paid. And it's from Modern Farmer, so, they're invested.
Well, it's also got a NewsGuard certified green check for 95 out of 100, so that I use NewsGuard because that seems to be the internet standard nowadays for some stupid reason. Even though they claim Fox News is fake news, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, really? They hold a higher standard than like the Daily Beast. It's kind of ridiculous at times on how much crap is out there, and the partisan ideology of the internet.
Yes, I mean, that is, unfortunately, for better or for worse, when you are in an environment where anybody can say anything at any time, you end up in a situation where things that are nuts can oftentimes become fact, or accepted truth rather, even though it might not have any basis in reality whatsoever.
I mean, that's what The Onion was for, and the Babylon Bee, and they're listed as fake news on NewsGuard. It's like, do you know what satire is? Like, come on,
right?
Come on.
It's like, no, this is comedy. This is not anything,
Yeah, it's silly, is what it is. Absolutely silly.
Yeah, but the kind of the corollary of this whole conversation is when you have a very integrated global economy, any problem anywhere becomes everybody's problem. And that's true with China's debt crisis.
Yes.
And that is, that's true of our own economic woes here with having inflation of domestic prices with deflation of international currency happening at the same time. And the potentiality of a wage price spiral happening in the coming months, causing stagflation.
That could also be linked to the forced $15 an hour minimum wage. because you're forcing companies to pay a higher minimum wage based off of a federal or state government level, which probably pushes like those companies that just make enough profit over the edge that they can no longer support it. Like I could understand it if like McDonald's and fast food joints be like $15 minimum. All right, cool. You guys could probably take the hit, no problem. But like mom and pop shops are getting completely closed down because of it, because they can't find employees or work or workers, I guess, because they can't
Yes, and
compete.
which is really right, which is really a fundamental problem of wages. Wages have been stagnant for far too long. The federal minimum wage hasn't gone up since 2009. And before that 1994. And so it's been up to cities and states to kind of, you know, kind of force businesses to raise wages up. Here in Seattle, we were on the front line of that. City of Seattle raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Everyone thought, you know, there was not going to hardly be a restaurant open to eat at after that. And a University of Washington study came out and said that actually no restaurants actually did better afterwards, and there were only 4 restaurants that closed down directly as a result of the raising of the minimum wage. I think part of the reason why the labor market is tight right now is people are offering wages that were mediocre 10 years ago for today's cost of living, and workers are going, rightly so, where the money is, you
Now,
know.
do you think it? Okay, let me get your opinion on this one. This government forcing companies to raise their wages. I feel like that's a
Yeah.
big slap to the face to the companies that are doing it, like just in general, because if the people had self-respect, they would actually work their way up to do better to make more money, wouldn't they? So
I
wouldn't
mean,
isn't that more of a
not
decay of people?
necessarily. I mean, not necessarily, because it depends on that depends on so many factors. I mean, that depends on factors like, you know, what skills does the person have? How old are they? You know, what have they you know, what have they been doing uh in terms of work over their life, all this type of thing. And it's also incredibly difficult um to incredibly difficult to do something and you know, quote unquote, move up or whatever have you, when your basic needs aren't even being met with your present employment.
I'm okay.
That's a problem all of its own.
Okay, but let's go with. I'm more looking at this as like a self-reliance issue and a self-respect. Like, if you're not gonna make a certain amount of money, then why do the job? I understand people are stuck in certain situations and it sucks that way. But at the same time, look at crackheads. Are you gonna let crackheads out crackhead you? Like, they're gonna find a way to get what they want, one way or another. And that's a whole nother level of determination that people should really strive to be better than, I think.
Right, but conversely, if someone is doing labor in a business, why is it that in society we have decided that certain jobs are just never going to pay you enough in order to be able to afford a decent living?
All right, well, the burger flipper at McDonald's could probably also write the same articles that BuzzFeed used to write about Brad Pitt's junk and probably make 70,000 a year, making being a vlogger about celebrity news.
Certainly, but also, you're also countering on the fact that the person has the skills, the startup capital to buy the equipment to do that, the knowledge, or quite honestly, the interest. Personally speaking, I like a McDonald's every once in a great while, and I would like to be continue to be able to get McDonald's every once in a great while. I don't see why someone who happens to be working in McDonald's and providing that labor and that service to me somehow just doesn't deserve to live, and if they want to actually live and do things well, then they should not be doing that. That whole notion to me is incredibly counterintuitive, because it's like, how, you know, how much are we not going to how much are we not going to value the very real work, labor, and service that is provided by these people?
Okay, you're doing a fast food job. Around where I've been, it's been just known as a high school job because it's something you can do part time, or it's not back breaking labor. working at McDonald's or Subway or anything like that. Granted, people can come
Right.
back at me and be like, well, the bags are really heavy. Shut up. I worked at McDonald's. It's not a labor heavy intensive job. That's just, it is what it is. It's not labor
I mean,
intensive.
but it is hot. I mean, I've worked in food.
Oh,
I've not
yeah.
worked in fast food, but I've worked in food. It's hot.
Oh, yeah,
You're on your
absolutely.
feet the entire time. You are covered in every manner of
Greasy
liquid
film.
grease, oil, all
Yeah.
this type of thing. Yeah, I mean, it's not great. I mean, that aspect of the job is not great. And also, even just like the amount of cleaning required, especially in between, for me, it was the end of the night, but like in McDonald's
Yeah.
in between shifts,
Yeah.
like that's its honestly own level of hell. And some of those chemicals aren't exactly the most pleasant thing to have to smell for a long period of time.
True.
The smell of ammonia. Like, so but the
Wait,
point
your
is
state
that,
allowed
like,
ammonia
that's-
cleaners?
Yeah,
That's a state
Yeah.
issue then, because our McDonald's never did. It was a complete like no ammonia period. Like you cannot
No,
use
in
ammonia
Colorado-
cleaners.
in Colorado, you could use it on the floors.
Oh no, not
Yeah.
Indiana. Could not do that in
Yeah,
Indiana at
no.
all.
No, in Colorado, you could use it as floor cleaner. That's the only area where you could use it was for
Okay.
floors. And so at the end of the night, the kitchen would get cleaned with ammonia chemical, and it was so it smelled so great.
But
It's,
to lead that into
yeah.
it though, it was the aspect of you're working a fast food job. Yeah, it's labor, but it's not really labor because you could go and take that experience, go apply to a union of sorts, steel worker, pipe fitter, electrical union, whatever have you, and make almost triple the money and actually work a labor wage that way. And that's a form of advancement. But that's also a form of self-reliance of figuring out like, okay, I need to change something different instead of daddy government give me stuff. And I think that's really the issue is we've been to
Right, but at the end of the day, though, who's going to work at McDonald's?
high schoolers.
And why should they not be able to live while they do so?
I mean, it's a shit job. It's a shit job, and that should be motivation enough to get people to do something better.
Yes, I mean, I'm not saying that people should necessarily stay in fast food forever, and I think that we should, have more pathways out of that world for people. I think like the 2 years of community college is a good idea, all this type of thing. But the reality is the average fast food worker is not a teenager. They're not even in college. The average fast food worker is a woman in her late 20s, early 30s with an average of about 1.8 kids, so basically between 1 and 2 kids. That's your average fast food worker. So by just
Also,
saying,
they,
it's supposed to be a high school job for young people, all this type of thing. Also, like the manager of the place probably is not going to be, a high school or anything like that. They're going to be managing it. They should be paid well. The franchisee has, a lot to do to keep up their franchise because most fast food restaurants are franchisee.
yes.
Has a lot to do with keep up with that as well. If we want to continue to have these things in our society, then people are going to need to be able to afford a decent standard of living while they do them. Or because we live in the free market, we're just not going to have workers in those areas.
I mean, we already
And,
don't have workers in those areas, even with the 15
Certainly.
minimum.
I mean, every sign around here in Seattle is guaranteed you. Every single fast food place has a gajillion now hiring signs. Like the McDonald's, they've gone extra.
Right.
They have gone up and printed yard signs. You pull in, and like
No.
leading up to the drive-through is
No.
5 signs saying now hiring, because they're so desperate for people.
All right, let's switch gears here because I just thought about this. So
Yeah.
in 2020, or it was 2019, pre-pandemic, we had, I believe it was 1.5 unemployment rate, something close to
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
After the pandemic, where did all those people go? Because of
A lo-
all these places are hiring, where did those
Yeah.
people go?
Well, a couple places. One, we killed about 1.5 million people. That'll change your labor market.
Which actually
a lot of
it hasn't affected the actual death tolls. The numbers are still staying the same.
I mean, yeah, we don't have necessarily as many excess deaths as one might think, but the reality is that a lot of anytime you have that much death in 1 year, that's going to change the labor market, and particularly when you have people in, you know, the service industries who were exposed to COVID a lot. They've either moved on to something else because they were shat upon for most of the pandemic, or for two, some of them died, or for three, they've gone back to school. In 2021 was one of the years they saw highest, you know, enrollment in post-secondary programs who were moving on to the jobs, and a lot of people quit to move on to other things. They're also, and this is a significant factor as well, a lot of women had to leave the workforce over childcare concerns. Cost of childcare is too high, and there's a lot of women, I mean parents in general, but particularly women,
who had
to leave the workforce because of childcare. Like, for example, I have dear friends right now, the lady of the household is working and her husband is staying home for the summer because they have a grade school age child, and they don't want to pay for childcare, and so she's working. Fortunately, she makes great money, so they can afford to do it, and he's staying home, and so they don't have childcare costs because he's there. That's the situation a lot of families with like younger children are in, is one of the parents that has to stay home for childcare because you can't afford daycare. So when you have all those factors, and then pile on top of that, you have lots of retirements, people that were paid to leave jobs early, all this type of thing. When you pile all those things together, there's going to be in any labor market some areas or some industries where they just can't find people.
Right.
And in this case, the industries hardest hit have been food and hospitality.
Yeah, because the rules and restrictions on them have been tripled, or if not quadrupled, the severity of them. Like, how many people don't want to be vaccinated, but have to be because of their job? Well, a lot of people just said, fuck you, and they left.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's certainly been true in the airline industry.
Which is kind of ridiculous, in my opinion. I really think that's ridiculous.
For the pilots, yes, not so for the flight attendants. I don't care if the pilots are vaccinated, we never see them anymore.
Exactly.
The flight attendants deal directly with the public. They really should be vaccinated. The pilots, I could care less. We literally are not allowed to see them anymore.
Yeah.
Post 9/11 regulations, we will never see them.
Yeah.
But the flight attendants are dealing with the public. They should be vaccinated. The pilots, I don't care. When it comes to hospitality, I kind of care less, because that problem can be fixed with decent airflow. Get a better HVAC system, hotels.
They actually have a much better HVAC system than people realize.
Yes,
they have such a great HVAC system.
Install a couple HEPA filters, problem sorted. So I think there has been, when it comes to the pandemic, particularly in worker situations, and private companies have done this now, the Biden administration has gone along with it. They have kind of bludgeoned the situation with a lot of regulations that in many cases don't make any sense. I was having a conversation last night with somebody, and he's like, why on earth should a truck driver who's sitting alone in his truck wear a mask? Who the hell's he gonna infect? And I'm kind of like, yeah, that's like people during the pandemic that wore a mask by themselves in their car. Yeah. That's the first thing I take off when I get in the car is my mask, because I'm the only one.
Or people on mountain bikes. I see this all the time. They're on mountain bikes wearing a face mask going through the trails. Like, who are you talking to? Come on.
Who are you going to infect? You're not going to be in one location long enough for your droplets to get to me. You're riding by at 20 miles an hour.
Yeah. Even though, come on, though. Let's face it, the vaccines have proven not to work.
And I'm kind of living proof of that. I am triple vaxxed, and I had COVID in February.
Our president's quadruple vaxxed, and he's got COVID twice.
Yes, and so I had a conversation a couple years ago with a woman from Australia who said, the way we're handling this pandemic does not make any sense given how they handled the Spanish flu. And she studies this. She's a historian. She studies this, and she's like, this doesn't make any sense. And she said, and also the other thing, and I said this at the time, I said, when vaccines came out, I said, all right, if we're doing the vaccines, then why on earth are we still doing COVID regulations? And I live in a Democrat blue city, so we went hard, and we have a very high vaccination rate, 88% in King County. Yes. All this type of thing. I was like, why on earth are we still doing all this masking and social distancing and blah, 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 if we have vaccines? And it seems to me at this point in the stage of the game, developing these vaccines to some greater or lesser degree was a giant waste of money.
Oh, absolutely.
They don't have the effect that we hoped they did. They don't last nearly long enough to put COVID behind us. No, everyone is subject and stuck with this, possibility of reinfection, possibility of long COVID, all this type of thing. I think on that end of things, it's back to the drawing board to find something that really works and go from there. And we won't even get into the long-term health effects of introducing the spike protein into the human body, which are now incredibly well documented and somewhat concerning.
Like,
that's a whole other discussion.
Okay, just a quick note. Did you read the Pfizer data dump?
I did.
Did you see the part where the vaccine loses effectiveness after 12 hours?
Yes.
And then after 13 days, you only get like a 7% chance of protection?
Yes, I did see that.
I am surprised they wanted to hide that for 50 years. Like, that alone, I could see a complete revolt because of it. Like, it's just absolutely strong-arming, like, oversight of the government to a strong-arming point.
Yes, I think one of the biggest stories of the last year and a half,
the soccer players falling over dead.
Well, not only that, but like the problem that we erroneously thought that vaccines were going to save the day, and they have not done any of the above.
Right.
I think that's probably one of the biggest stories over the last year and a half, and I think. And people, especially a lot of people I follow on Twitter, have a variety of different health conditions, and they're kind of like, it seems like society has given up on us and COVID and the whole thing, and how could people do that? And my reply is, what else can we do?
Self-reliance.
We social distance, we masked, we did the vaccine thing. I stood in line for hours to get vaccinated, all this sort of thing. And nothing really has helped or worked. So unless you're just willing to stay in your house and not interact with humans for a very long time, then I'm not quite sure what else you really want us to do.
I have an interesting mindset with this. It comes down to, why are we punishing those who feel like their healthcare is their own choice for a favor of those who are scared of outside? Like, I never understood that. Like, people have the right to do whatever they want with some degree. If I want to go outside and do whatever I want, I can pretty much do it. But when COVID hit, and like later on throughout like late term of the COVID pandemic, it was, no, you still got to mask, you still got to do stuff, be vaccinated, all this other stuff to go do things. Why?
Yes. Well, that was what me and my Australian friend were talking about. And that was where she was very confused, because she's like, if you're getting vaccinated, but we still have to mask and we still have to social distance, then what's the point?
Yeah.
We've spent billions of dollars on these vaccines for what? All we've done is given the pharmaceutical companies free money at this point. Mm-hmm. We might as well have written them a check and saved the time.
And with no liability.
Right. And so, yes. And so it's a very difficult thing. The problem with communicable disease, and we saw this as late as the 80s before we had a vaccine for mumps, measles, and rubella, is that when you have a highly communicable disease like that, the only way to stop the community spread is to isolate the people that have it away from those that don't, in the hopes that they won't get it. And that is the primary strategy we use to try to stop COVID. Unfortunately, the one thing that we know would be the most effective at stopping COVID is the one thing we haven't done, and that's introducing excellent air filtration in buildings and UV light. A study in Israel showed that COVID dies almost immediately in the presence of concentrated UV light. Literally, all you would have to do is install UV lights at the doors of every building in this country, and COVID would be no more. I mean, that's literally all you have to do. Like, filter the air, spread some UV light around, and COVID is sorted. The Jews figured it out.
I'm giggling because it's like, that sounds like a Resident Evil movie in Raccoon City, when like you enter in the safe building, it's UV light everywhere. That's what it reminded me of immediately.
No, it does. No, it does sound like a science fiction thing. Like you're in the video game and it's like, yeah, you have to stand in the light booth for, a whole counter in order to,
decontamination in progress.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that absolutely is kind of what it sounds like, because that's basically what it is. Like,
Yeah,
if you want to kill the droplets, you have to pull them out of the air, kill them with some UV light, COVID sorted.
yeah.
And that's the one thing we haven't really done that would actually stop community spread. But when it comes to communicable disease, and we even see this with the vaccination and treatment of tuberculosis, which in most states, if you refuse treatment for tuberculosis, they can put you in jail, is that you have to test, you have to contact trace. We know how to deal with communicable disease in society. The problem with COVID was because it was new, we were lacking in tools and lacking in knowledge. 2 years on, we have tools, we have knowledge. We're not necessarily using all the ones that we could do that would actually help people. And consequently, because it seems like nothing that we've done so far has worked, most people in society have given up and at this point just want to move on with their lives. And as although it's frustrating for the people who feel like, they have a health condition that precludes this or all this other thing or whatever have you, society can't not function forever,
Well, that
unfortunately.
reminds me of the story of World War II in England. The English, after 4 months of being bombed, they finally just came out of the bunkers and proceeded life as normal. And then the bombings were just part of their everyday life because they realized we have to do something. We can't just hide away for so long. And that was a very famous
Yeah.
thing that Churchill, I think it was Churchill, came out and said that this shows the true strength of the English people because we're not afraid of the Germans bombing us. Which, pissed Hitler right off, of course.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very difficult thing. I mean, yes, it's the same thing with the pandemic is, we were wiping groceries and using hand sanitizer every 5 seconds. And
Oh, I
we
wasn't,
were,
but all right.
wiping down gas pump handles, all sorts of crazy things. I was actually homeless for the first 6 months of the pandemic, traveling around the country. So I got to see all sorts of responses or lack thereof to the pandemic, from mass and social distancing in Massachusetts to when I was in Tennessee, what pandemic, never heard of her.
Pretty
Was the
much.
adage when I was in Franklin, Tennessee, south of Nashville. You're going around and being like, pandemic, never heard of her. And like life was just proceeding on as normal. So I got to see all sorts of different responses and traveling across the country with nobody on the roads and closed gas stations, but the gas pumps had been left on, all
Right.
this type of thing. It was quite surreal. And yeah, that is it, it's a difficult thing, but the point being that there are some very effective things we could do that would actionably probably bring COVID to a close and reduce the amount of influenza going around, because that was one of the byproducts of the pandemic was we literally,
Yeah.
knocked out the flu. In fact, there were 3 specific strains of influenza that they think may be extinct
Yeah, I heard that. I
because,
heard that, yeah.
yes, because there wasn't a reserve of it around. So I think there's some actionable systemic things that we could do in terms of air filtration and UV light that would really bring the COVID pandemic and a host of other airborne diseases to a close. Are we doing those things? No. So the vast majority of society has given up and moved on. We have Paxlovid now, which gets you through COVID in a matter of days. I just had a friend go through that. He was done with COVID and testing negative after 8 days with Paxlovid. And we're moving on.
Monoclonal, what was it, monoclonal antibodies?
Yes,
I
yes.
have a friend of mine who's in Florida. He got COVID, got the antibody treatment, and tested negative in like 22 hours, and no symptoms whatsoever.
Yeah. So I
Granted,
mean
every
that's
case is different. Of course, every case is different, but
right,
that's
right.
a
But I think that's
decent number.
yeah, that's emblematic of I think where we are in the pandemic. So I don't necessarily think we need to take a 2020 attitude
No,
to the state of the pandemic in 2022.
no.
And so I get frustrated with people that are kind of like, oh, society's given up on the pandemic and left behind. I said, no, what we're doing is we're learning to live with COVID, which we are going to have to do. It's here
Oh, yeah.
now. It's with us. But you have this whole class of people, especially online, who expect us to have a 2020 attitude 2 years later and are angry
And
that we are not taking the same precautions, even though we don't necessarily need to do that as much as we did 2 years ago.
well, they're also trying to make the same call for like COVID with the monkeypox situation, which
Yes.
I think is an absolute joke. I granted, it's a serious disease. It's an STD from everything I've read. We've seen it before. It's not new.
Oh, it's a known quantity.
Yeah.
We've known it for a while. Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's already a vaccine made for it. Back in I believe it was 87, they had a vaccine for it. And,
of course, because monkeypox is a derivation of smallpox, which we'd had a vaccine for
right.
for decades. Yeah, that was, yeah, of course, yeah.
So I think it's more of the news media trying to say, fear this thing, fear it. And then Twitter goes on a rampage. You know?
I mean, yes. I mean, that is definitely a as someone who's active on Twitter, that's definitely a cycle that occurs. I think part of the difficulty with kind of monkeypox at this stage is there's just as many ways to spread it as COVID. It's very difficult, it's painful, it's disfiguring in the same way that smallpox is. Right now it's spreading primarily in the gay male community and in queer communities because those communities tend to have more sexual partners. However, it is not an STD in the way that, like, most STDs can only be contracted through direct sexual contact. Monkeypox can be contracted by anyone if you are exposed to the pus from the sores or the lesions or anything like that. You can be exposed to it. So you can, if someone has monkeypox and you're staying next to them on a train or a bus or in line at the store, that's an exposure to monkeypox. So in that way, it's not an STD in the traditional sense.
You can't get monkeypox from air droplets, though. You can get it from heavy skin contact, but it has to be very heavy skin contact. And a lot of the times it has to be into like an internal wound or an external wound similar to like AIDS.
I had read that they had air droplet transmission of it in Africa, but I don't know if that type of community transmission is common in this country yet.
Not that I've seen for this country. But
fair enough, yeah.
My biggest concern is say a bisexual man has monkeypox, has sex with a woman. That woman is now the one that's going to be transmitting that to someone else that way. That's when we're going to see monkeypox really kick off. Personally.
I think you're also going to see it in schools. My dear friend, my dear friend whose husband is home for the summer taking care of their son. He's in the middle grades, and she works for a big healthcare conglomerate here in the Seattle area. And they're already having briefings about how they're going to deal with the K through 12 school age population and the potential spread there, and how it can then spread from kids in school to then all their families to then all their friends beyond that, and how to control that before it gets really bad. And they're already having conversations because school here in the Seattle area starts up in 3 weeks.
I could see that as a good game plan. However, I think it's more of just that, a game plan. Because if the kids got monkeypox, if the kids got monkeypox, I have more questions than I really want to have. Because, like, why?
But at the same time, though, we're talking, okay, even if we put air droplets to one side and we're just talking about heavy skin contact, I don't know about you, but like when I was 8 and playing with kids on the playground, we were bumping into each other.
Right.
We were all over kids pile into a giant pile, and then those kids go home, they cuddle with their siblings, they cuddle with their parents, all this type of thing. And all of a sudden you've got spread going.
But I'm going before that. Why does one kid have monkeypox? That's my question.
Well, yes.
That's where my question goes, like, why? Why?
Yes.
What has that kid been doing? Or who did what?
Let's take your scenario. A bisexual man goes and has sex with a dude on the low, comes home, gives it to his wife. His wife is cuddling with her children as she does.
Right.
And now the children has monkeypox. The kid goes to school, gives it to my friend's kid, Oliver, who brings it home to his parents.
Right.
He has a birthday party coming up in 2 weeks. I go down. When you have a communicable disease, like, this is how it happened. Like that is a pathway. There's other pathways, but like that's a potential pathway. So like, yes, if a kid comes to school with monkeypox, we should have some questions
Yeah.
for sure. For all the reasons that I know you're talking about that we won't say here, I also would have those questions. Be kind of like, that's odd. I feel like we should get CPS on the phone. Look up their number, like, sort of thing. I mean, yes, we should have those questions, but there's also, we'll call them more banal ways of getting, and also we have to think about college kids, and those kids are going to have sex. I had a lot of sex in college. Those kids are going to have sex, and a couple horny dudes or a couple horny chicks, and all of a sudden it can be spreading through a college population like wildfire.
Right. But I also think that could also be because we have demoralized and stigmatized monogamy of sorts, like that. Granted, it's not for everybody. I get it, but at the same time, it's how many diseases would not be spread around if that was the case. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, that's a question of STDs and morality and what is the ideal pair bonding relationship for humans and all this type of thing, and that varies by culture. There were many ancient cultures where monogamy was virtually unknown.
Right. Yeah.
There are still some cultures on the planet today where monogamy is unknown.
Yeah.
But I mean, those societies tended to be smaller. They tended to be more tribal. They certainly weren't in a nation of 325 million people. There weren't that many people on the planet when those cultures were around. And you have other societies like the Navajo that are matrilineal. The parent, who your father is rather irrelevant in Navajo society. There are many African cultures that are the same way. So there's multiple ways of organizing humans around that. I mean, yes, would it be nice if more people were married and in stable relationships and partnerships and had sex with one person? Would we have fewer STDs? Yes, of course.
Yeah.
That ship sailed 50 years ago. So unless we somehow are going to roll back the clock on, the sexual liberation, I don't see how that discussion is helpful.
I actually think it's coming back, though. And here's my reason for it. A lot of liberal parents, I'm just going to use air quotes, liberal, democratic, however you want to say it, on the left. They're only having, I think it's 1.7 children per year.
Yes. That's right.
Where the conservative side of things, or Republican side of things, are having 2.4 children a year, something close to that. It's been a while since I looked at the number. But yes. I see in the next 30 years or so, we're going to see more heavily conservative-based kind of children and raised that way. They're going to see, this is how relationships are supposed to be, looking at it as a standard conservative relationship. And so you're going to see more conservative children, which are going to be more monogamous. And
but you're also presuming that those conservative children are going to continue to live with the same moral perspective and the same lifestyles as their parents. And I can tell you, as someone who grew up evangelical, and who I can count on one hand how many people stayed in the church after they turned 18, that, just because they grew up that way and were raised that way doesn't necessarily mean they're going to stick with that or want to keep that lifestyle going or all this type of thing. Right. In my experience, it's rule of a third. You have a third that like it and will stay. Yeah. You have a third that are mediocre about it, and you have a third of people like me who couldn't get away from it fast enough.
Right. I get that. But
that's one of those things that there's a distribution there. Right. There's a distribution there.
I get that, but I wasn't going with the religious aspect of it. I was more of us looking at the fact of like a lot of conservative parents. We're just going to say conservative as a catch-all for right now. A lot of conservative parents teach their children a certain framework, and whether the children want to or not, they adopt that framework and kind of make it their own a certain way, and then continue forward with it, which usually tends to be, more traditional, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times they end up like me. I fall right dead center of the midline of between left and right. Like, I really am. I am dead center on the political ideology because, I understand and I accept, maybe a universal basic income is good for people who are, not doing too well. But at the same time, it's I also think there should be a basic level of Medicare for everybody, but not to the point where some people take it to. And then I'm also a gun-loving American and who believes that free speech shouldn't be censored. I also think that BlackRock's formulation should be more instilled into the government basis than it should be as a religious aspect. And so, like, I'm really dead center, and I also think free market capitalism is bullshit.
No, I mean, I tell people, I mean, I was a Republican until 2012. I was national delegate to the Young Republicans Convention 2009. I was chapter president, state treasurer for the state of Colorado Young Republicans. I ran a Tea Party publication called Liberty Inc. Journal. I was managing editor for a year and a half. And I worked for a Republican state senator as a legislative aide in 2006. So I've met, a lot of famous names in Republican circles. Ken Buck, who currently represents the 4th Congressional District in Colorado, who's in Congress right now. I've had dinner at his house. I've met former President Bush. I've met Dick Cheney. I've met Karl Rove. Every, big name Republican, with a couple of exceptions, I've met most of them. And when I got involved in Occupy Denver, aspect of Occupy Wall Street, was the beginning of my liberalism. And so that my liberalism really began in the economic sphere. In the social sphere, I have much more of a laissez-faire attitude than a lot of people do. And I think it should be something very personal. I'm someone who's seen, I've enjoyed wonderful monogamy in my personal relationships.
Yeah.
I've also had the privilege of being able to have a lot of fun with a lot of different peoples and partners and situations and
look, I'm
and all this
guilty as
type of
charged
thing.
as being a man whore when I was younger. All right.
Yeah. So I've seen both sides, and I'm someone who would love to be married. No one's buying the goods on offer, but I would love to be married. And so that that is a thing. I've been in relationships where I was totally faithful. I was in a relationship where I most definitely was not. So I've seen multiple sides of the kind of the breadth and depth of these issues and all this type of thing. Also, when it comes to being moderate, when it comes to immigration, I'm very Republican. I want to have a strong, robust border patrol. I want to have a strong, robust, functional immigration system. I think we should have a guest worker program. I think it should be highly regulated and ran by the government. This whole idea that we just have to open our borders to whoever shows up, I think is the most inane idea I've ever heard.
Yes, I'm right there with you on that one. I do. Okay.
And no other developed country does that. Try immigrating to Australia. Good luck.
Sweden. Or Sweden even.
Or New Zealand or Canada that has a points-based, like, how
merit system.
Are you to our society? Yes, like no other developed country does this. But for the United States, we're expected to just take anybody who shows up.
All we have is a crossing guard that has a sign that says, "Come on in, it's free."
Right.
But no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So, and that's something, a lot of my open border Democrat friends get very angry when I say, no, we, as other developed nations do, deserve to have a robust immigration system that works and functions so we can bring in guest workers, we can bring in new people, but in a way that is regulated and tracked so we can slow down on visa overstays, which is the biggest source of illegal immigration. And we can, have the workers that we need without making it onerous for them to come and go and return to their own country and all this type of thing. And I don't think people realize how much our immigration policy in this country costs us, we the taxpayers. It's expensive.
$3.5 billion a year, I believe.
It's not cheap. That's not a small amount of money. That's not cheap.
No.
In terms of the amount and also the impacts it has on social services, the education system, all of these things, like the costs of this stuff piles up.
Like, especially
for me, it's cost benefit analysis.
Well, especially because take states, California is a sanctuary state taking federal money to pay essentially to help subsidize the cost for all the immigration that they have. That is taking away from like you said, the welfare state, the Social Security, the Medicare, the federal stuff to fix the roads, and possibly even some of the water shortages that they have.
Yeah,
that is bleeding. Like that, just to me, if you're looking at like America as a whole, it's just an open gash wound, and just money's falling out of it, going nowhere. So I completely agree with you that the immigration is a huge thing that we need to fix. Hell, even Biden said that recently, and he's starting to patch the holes in the wall in Arizona. It's like, wait, he's taking on Trump's policies right now? I thought you hated the guy.
Well, and not even what's even more entertaining is recently they just inked a new deal with Mexico where they're going to improve border security with new smart cameras, lasers, and all this type of thing. And Mexico's cutting a check for 1.5 billion for the privilege. So indeed, Biden has fulfilled a Trump campaign promise. Mexico's going to pay for the wall. And so, it's like Trump said it, but Biden got it done. I mean, yes, it's things like that. I mean, yes, there's a lot of people in politics, especially left-wing politics, who shit on
everything,
moderates and centrists, and complain about, if you're a centrist, that just means you're, right wing and all this type of thing. And there's this whole list of things that you absolutely must 110% agree with to be considered a good leftist.
It's a cult.
And most of the time, I find myself with them on 80 to 90% of what they're doing. But there's a couple things that they talk about and a couple things that they express that I don't agree with. You're more with them on UBI than I am. I have a podcast episode about UBI coming out at the end of August. I don't think UBI is a good idea. I don't. I think one, it will cause inflation. I think two, it will cause price inflation. And I think for three, it's a very poor way to implement a decent welfare state. I'm not saying we shouldn't give out cash payments to people in certain situations. I think we should. I think, as Andrew Yang suggests, dumping the entire welfare state and just writing checks to people would end up being a net social negative for us all.
So this was actually my idea.
In that way, you're to the left of me.
So my idea on that was actually kind of based off what Andrew Yang said. My idea was we'll trade welfare as it is out. But here's the kicker. You will have a universal basic income that's similar to welfare. However, you can only claim that universal basic income for 4 years at most. This is not including disabilities. This is not including like drug users. This is not including anything like that. If you are an avid, say we'll use the worst drug possible, heroin or meth. If you're on any of those, you have to make an effort to be clean in order to still be on the welfare state or the universal basic income. If you don't, then you are no longer allowed to collect money from the government that way. It sounds harsh, but that's the only way you're going to fix it, is you have to set a boundary and don't let them cross it. And those people that aren't working could simply just be like, well, it's unemployment. Well, we're going to work that in with the universal basic income, and it's going to be, you have to find a way of getting employment. Granted, there's going to be people that cheat the system, of course. It's fine. It's going to be part of it. You have to work so long in order to keep collecting that, universal basic income. It's not going to be for people who have a day-to-day job. They're going to be collecting, they're going to take whatever the state GDP is. They're going to take the lower half of the state GDP. That's going to be their basic income. It's going to be per state, not across the board. Because rent in California... Well, yes,
because universal basic income in California versus Mississippi is two very different amounts of money.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, California and West Virginia have way different tax codes and price gouging. So, $900 in West Virginia could get you a lot, but $900 in California could get you a sandwich. It's just stupid.
No. I mean, my rent in West Virginia for half of a farmhouse was $925. Here in Seattle, if you only have $925, you're going to be at one of our fabulous homeless camps because that's not going to get you anything.
Right.
I pay $300 more for a third of the space in Seattle. So that's so that's that is definitely, I think, a good. I mean, I don't necessarily think it's a good way to implement the welfare state. I like things to be a little bit more targeted and with purpose. But if that proposal was being seriously considered, I wouldn't necessarily be mad about it. I also think Andrew Yang brings up a good point. People like his wife who take care of their special needs child, having some sort of income for them to bring in, I think particularly for the bottom third of income earners, would radically change people's lives.
Oh, absolutely.
Now that's not a bad idea. Having some sort of subsidy for caregivers. If you are a a family who's taking care of an older person at home, there should be a program for you.
Yeah.
If you are a stay-at-home mom because you have a special needs kid and you absolutely must homeschool or whatever have you, in addition to their disability, there should be an income for the caregiver. And that's not uncommon. Britain has that, Australia has that, New Zealand has that, Canada has that, the Nordics have that, parts of Eastern Europe have that. That's not unheard of in other developed countries. Even Japan has it, and they don't have a welfare state in Japan to speak of, and they have that. So I'm not up, and that's, I mean, things like that I think are a great idea, and I think it would allow families a little bit more flexibility to be able to have that additional income and take care of their family obligations,
which would also bolster the economy because they're going to be able to buy more.
Right. Yes, and it would also enable them to raise their standard of living, and those dollars would circulate through the economy in ways that are incredibly positive. I think it would be an economic boon.
Yeah.
You know, because they're going to go out and buy stuff and do things and be able to afford to live a certain life. I think that's an excellent sort of plan. However, when you have proposals of saying we're going to fix the problems of capitalism by giving every single adult, no questions asked, money.
Right. That's what I tried to avoid.
Terrible idea.
That is what I tried to avoid.
I just don't think that's a good idea.
And that kind of.
But you have a lot of the UBI crowd that's what they think that they want to do, and I'm saying I just don't. I can see how on the lower end, in some situations, having cash payments is a great idea, and I think it would be a good addition to our social safety net. Do I think we should just hand out money to everyone, no questions asked? No, because on the upper end, all you're going to end up doing is giving free money to Wall Street. If you give my parents, who are in the top 10% of income earners, if you give them each $1,000 a month, I can tell you exactly what my dad's going to do with that.
Put it right in Wall Street.
That check's going to go. Yeah, that check is going straight to a stockbroker, and he's buying more shares of whatever position he's building right now. Like that's you might in fact cut out the middleman. Just send Wall Street the money.
Right.
Like don't waste sending it to people. Don't waste the postage. Just send it to New York. It's a shorter distance. And that's what's going to happen. So I think on the low end, some increase in cash payments would be a good idea.
Right. But again, that's what I said.
As a principle overall, I'm a bit anemic.
Well, that makes sense. But like I said, though, like if you're working, you're not going to be getting the cash, the taxpayer funded UBI. But that also goes into what I was saying about like the healthcare for all. My situation for it is, if you break your arm, you should be able to go to the hospital and get it fixed or healed, and walk away no debt. If you have some kind of weird disease, say cancer, brain tumor, whatever, and it's terminal, that's where your private insurance would pick up. Because I believe in private insurance with the government assistance should be hand in hand. I mean, we're already paying for Medicare, so we already have, health care for all, but we can't access that until we're 80 or 67 and a half. Right. So, like, why not just use the money that's there? It just never made sense to me.
I mean, that's what they tried to do with the Affordable Care Act, was to have the government option with private insurance layered over top, and the insurance companies killed that so fast it wasn't even funny. I'm with you there. I did two thought experiments on the Cameron Journal. I did one about my proposals for Medicare for All, which actually steals from state Medicaid systems that I've been on, because I have spent most of my life as a broke, starving artist. So I've been on state health insurance off and on for a lot of my life. So I've gotten to see different states and different systems. And the one I like is an income-based fee structure. So like in Colorado, so like in Washington, medications are free, but they're hard to get. In Colorado, your doctor can prescribe you whatever medication they want without any question, but there's a fee schedule for how much it's a nominal fee between $1 and $5 you have to pay. The older, the cheaper the drug, the lower the fee. The newer, the more expensive the drug, the higher the fee. So my thought was, why don't we take that and apply that to healthcare, where for every income bracket, there's a fee schedule for doctor's visits, but none of it ever exceeds $50. So the bottom third pays nothing, the middle third pays some, the top third pays no more than $50.
That sounds like a progressive tax system.
Basically, yeah, it's like that's basically what a lot of states do this with their Medicaid programs already, and it works really well. Yeah. So I'm like, well, let's take that idea. It already works. like take that idea and then have the government be, taking care of most of the rest of it. And you can, between the payroll taxes and the fee structure, you're able to create this pool of revenue that actually pays for the program. So the program actually ends up being self-sustaining.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially when you mush in Medicaid, Medicare, the VA, and the Indian Affairs system, and you push all of that into one government system, that's a huge pool of money. That's like about $150 billion. Plus the fees on top of that, plus a payroll tax. That's a huge chunk of money. We could buy ourselves a very nice healthcare system with that revenue and have everyone be covered and people not going into medical bankruptcy. And GoFundMe is going to need a new business model to figure out what they're going to do when people are not begging the internet for money. Like, this is, but then I also conversely, my mother challenged. Yeah, my mother challenged me. She said, what if we went to an all cash system? And so I don't think it's out yet. It's going to be out later this month. I wrote a post of what an all cash healthcare system would look like. Because if you look at vision and dental, which are areas where most people don't have insurance,
right?
You have essentially a cash system. I have keratoconus, I have eye issues, and I don't have vision coverage, so I pay for that stuff myself. And so the costs are more reasonable because it has to be what people can actually afford.
Right.
And there's care credit and all this type of thing you can do to pay for this stuff, all this type of thing. But what's interesting with that thought experiment was, how healthcare would have to change to accommodate what people can afford, where government still might need to step in, where hospitals and charities might need to step in. Basically, the way healthcare was before the invention of the HMO in 1971. And that was, for me, as important a thought experiment as ever, because the only way you can come up with an effective way to advocate for Medicare for all is to also understand what the opposite of that is. And what that looks like as well. And so now we have these two contrasting ideas that people can come to the Cameron Journal, look at together and say, here's what I think Medicare for all should look like. And here's what the exact opposite of that would look like.
Now, let me pick your brain on this. Do you think there should be a multiple insurance programs, or do you think it should be a one insurance program ideal? And then I have a counter question to change that up later.
Yeah, I think I personally speaking, would like to see the health insurance companies go away. They own most of the hospital system. So in my magical world, I would have them on government contract to provide healthcare services. That keeps them in business, but gets rid of their whole health insurance thing. And that's so I think we should basically have a single payer system where the buck stops at the Treasury Department. That's who the checks come from. But the healthcare companies are contracted to actually provide the care, because we don't want the doctors working for the government. The British do that with the NHS, and I have great friends in Britain. I've lived there. The NHS has its issues.
Right.
I don't necessarily want doctors being government employees.
Right.
Because there's some issues with that. France has that problem too. Canada has that problem too. I'm not with that. But I think having the health insurance companies be health provider companies, have them on contract to provide services, that's a good idea. And we could kind of build on that basis. By and large, I would like to see private insurance go away. Now, the British have a very expensive private insurance for the wealthy who don't want to be part of the NHS and want something nicer. We could probably keep some modicum of that system in place, but by and large, I would like to see private health insurance go the way of the dodo bird.
Okay, so then my counterpoint to that is, do you think it should be illegal for pharmaceutical companies to lobby in Congress and the Senate as much as they do?
Absolutely. And no more advertising. Whoever thought that was an idea? My God. Watching late night cable is just a parade of medication with awful side effects and very happy young actors talking about, how great their psoriasis medications. No. Get the pharmaceutical companies the hell out of Congress. I mean, we need campaign finance reform. That's a whole other separate discussion. But get them out of Congress and get their ads off television.
Brought to you
Stop the
by
madness.
Pfizer.
Yes, yeah, it's like, and you're also fired. Like,
Yeah.
you know, just like, no, like you've got to stop that madness there. To get the pharmaceutical companies out of Congress, you got to have campaign finance reform. We got to dump Buckley v. Vallejo and Citizens United.
Yeah.
Because that also goes for pharmaceutical companies, defense contractors, get them out of there. The airlines, the automakers, all of them out. A lot of you out. Bye-bye. Go away.
I could see the defense contractors being kind of an important thing, but I think it would be more up to like a bidding war, like how most contractors work in the States anyways, instead of just, yeah, we got a government contract and my Bob's my cousin and he runs this company, let him use it. Like that's how a lot of it's run right now. If it was like an open contact, like for Haiti, I know Haiti off the top of my head here, because when they had that hurricane, our military went in there to do rescue relief with, I believe it was the USS Mercy, and a government defense contractor got hired in to come in there and rebuild everything. That went to some other like congressperson's cousin, and that's who got the bill. It should have been up to a bid contract instead of the no bid contracts.
Yeah, no, and that was in the Iraq War, especially in the early days. There was a lot of no bid contracts handed out.
Oh yeah,
that were. Oh my goodness, the amount of pork money that, you know, was just shoveled into the pockets of Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing. A lot of them was just insane.
Yeah.
Halliburton's whole company revenue was the federal government for 20 years. And it's the sad thing is it's not even just an American problem, it's an international problem. There's a very large French conglomerate by the name of Schlumberger that also was making. Yes, they made billions off the war in Afghanistan by providing services to, because Afghanistan became a NATO operation at one point, and so the French and the Germans were over there, and they hired Schlumberger to provide all these security services and all this type of thing for French, German, Italian, and British troops in Afghanistan. And so it ended up being many billions of British pounds and euros shoveled into the pockets of the shareholders of Schlumberger in France. Like it's
to defend a fucking airport. That's what they were there for.
Yes, and an airport and a handful of Quonset huts. And to make sure that there was a decent vintage of wine on site at all times. So that's yes, like that. Yes, I mean that whole system, especially when you have a handful of companies who can provide these services at this level, which really is Halliburton, Schlumberger, Honeywell, and a couple of others, is incredibly unfair. And that the government contracting problem, particularly in DoD, is so awful. DoD managed to lose $2.4 trillion over the last 20 years. They can't account for a dime of it.
Yeah,
that's a huge problem. And can you imagine the Republican vitriol if that was the food stamp program? If SNAP came and said, yeah, we lost $2.4 trillion, don't know where it went. The Republicans would shit themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a few Democrats who would shit themselves, but DOD can just casually come along and be like, yeah, we lost 2.4 trillion, have no clue where it went to. It barely makes a headline. That's a huge fucking problem.
Oh, yeah. That's, I believe there was another thing that DOD recently did. I don't remember what it was. Let me see if I can find it real quick. They did something recently, and it was to spend, I think it was $4.6 trillion for Ukraine humanitarian efforts or something like that. But a lot of people are like, DOD doesn't have the option to send money like that. Why are they doing that?
Yeah,
that's Congress that does that.
Yeah.
It's just.
I mean, I imagine especially in the early days before there was congressional legislation, I imagine they reallocated some discretionary parts of the defense budget for Ukraine, which they can do without congressional approval.
Right.
At the discretion of the president, which is fine. But yes, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of, when you start having these things, a lot of money starts sloshing around with no accountability for where it goes, who it goes to, and damn little oversight. That's its own problem. But unfortunately, we have to wrap up because I have a meeting in 7 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So we should have final thoughts and everything.
All right, that works. Well, I have to say, I really enjoyed talking to you. You're very knowledgeable.
Thank you.
It's great to have somebody keep up with a different perspective on things. And now my camera wants to fuck up and phase out for some reason.
Yeah, no, this is a very interesting conversation, and it's always nice to hear another perspective and to have a great conversation in a sane way, and to kind of if anything, I hope it gets people thinking about things, analyzing news narratives, because news is a narrative. That's why it's called a story. And
I'm gonna use
and
that.
yeah, no, please, go ahead, spread it far and wide. Um, and all this type of thing. It's good. It was a very productive conversation, so I'm glad to have done it.
Yeah, where can people find you at?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Cameron Cowan, Cowan. You can find me on Instagram by the same. And you can also find me principally at Cameron Journal, like the type you write in, .com. So, and all my social links are there. There's over 700 posts to listen to. And when you're in the car, just look up the Cameron Journal podcast. All of my episodes are about the length of a long commute. They're all about 45 minutes. So if you have a long commute, take me to work with you. Or if you have a short commute, take me to work with you and take me home with you. So and Cameron Journal season 2, the Cameron Journal podcast season 2 is out right now, which includes great episodes on the TV show Mr. Robot, How the West Was Won, High Speed Rail. There's an episode on banks and banking coming up, and there was also a great episode on the interstate system. So,
right. Do you have anything for me? Any kind of anything you want to ask me real quick?
I think the only thing I would kind of curious about is how did you start doing this show? What inspired you?
What inspired me was a bunch of my friends said, you got a lot of knowledge, you need to spread it. That's where it was. Because
no, that's good.
A lot of the times it would be like I join into like an Xbox party chat and be like, can you believe what the Federal Reserve is doing now? These goddamn assholes.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times it was, hey, do you know something about this? Go into a 45-minute discussion. I just wanted a yes or no, man. Like
yeah. No, that is that is definitely happened to me. I have a good friend of a good group of buddies up in Massachusetts, and we met on Overwatch team chat. And I had started this business. I'd left the business, and when I met them, we were just, I'd come home from work every night and we would play and whatever have you. And they were kind of like, oh my God, like you should like have a podcast. I'm like, yeah, I used to, I quit, I gave up, all this type of thing. And so when I found myself in between jobs in 2019, it was kind of the same conversation, to be kind of like, well, like you've been giving us like free content on like Overwatch chat for the last 2 years. Like you should like start up your podcast again and everything. And so the Cameron Journal was born.
Yeah, well, right now most of my show has been like Dungeons and Dragons stuff. Like I just stream Dungeons and Dragons with my friends and just put it on YouTube. That's all I do.
Yeah.
And then I do interviews randomly.
Awesome.
Well, all my shit's half baked.
No, this has been absolutely fun and delightful, and I'm so glad we did it.
If you ever get the urge to come back on, you're more welcome to get a hold of me and get back onto it. I know you got a meeting, so we'll wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming on. This was a lot of fun, and I hope your meeting goes well.
I do. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Enjoy.
Bye-bye.
And I accidentally hit the stop button. All right, here we go. My bad. Uh-oh. I broke the webcam. How did I break the webcam? Where is... Damn it. I broke it. No, how did I break it? Alright. Either way, thank you everybody for watching. I hope you have a great night. And until then, have fun. I may or may not be streaming something else later on. I'm debating if I should stream PUBG later, and I think I'm going to. So probably about 30-ish minutes I'll be back on with playing PUBG.